Okay, welcome back. We are going to continue our lecture on the continued move west. And for part two, we are going to talk about, or begin by talking about manifest destiny. So, manifest destiny is this phrase that you're probably going to hear a lot during this period. Manifest destiny is this idea that Americans believed that the United States was destined by God to possess North America from the Atlantic to the Pacific. So, in other words, Americans believe that God had chosen the United States to sort of fulfill this destiny, to expand, from sea to shining sea, which is why they had to continue pushing west. And in many ways, it sort of justified whatever actions they took in order to accomplish that. If it meant pushing Native Americans off of the land, then so be it. If it meant that the United States had to go to war with a country in order to take the lands that it was destined to possess, then so be it. Now, the term manifest destiny was coined by a man named John O. Sullivan. Now, Sullivan was a journalist who basically wrote this article while he was trying to, convince both Democrats and Whigs to work together, to put aside their differences, their political differences, and to work together in order to support, the right to manifest our destiny is what he said. The right to manifest our destiny, to overspread and possess the whole of the continent which Providence has given us. Now, this kind of rhetoric was very popular. And in this image that you see here, you can see how it was kind of represented in that way. Now, the image that I have here is kind of cropped out, so you don't get to see the full image, and I apologize for that. But here what you see basically is, a representation of education and civilization and Christianity, almost like this angel, right? A white angel nonetheless. And in her hand, she holds not just a book to represent education and civilization, but she's also, and again, I wish I had the full image here. But she's carrying with her these telephone lines, telegraph lines, if you will, actually. And so along with those telegraph lines is the railroad that's coming. You see the stagecoach here and another one here, people moving out west. All over on this part of the image, there's farmers, white farmers, obviously. And on this side of the image, you see the Native Americans sort of cowering, into the darkness, right? You see the wilderness, this savage nature of the wild being sort of tamed by education, enlightenment, and civilization and American whiteness. So, was manifest destiny a popular term at the time? Absolutely. 100%, without a doubt. Why should Americans continue to move out west? Because we are to manifest our destiny. And like I told you in the previous lecture, it was politically popular. It basically justified any and all actions undertaken by the U.S. government and by Americans in order to fulfill this. Now, the problem with this is, there was already a lot of people living out west. It's not like it was a vast, empty place, uncharted, and just ready and willing to be tamed. That's not the case at all. I want to remind you that in Unit 1 of this semester, we talked about the settling, the exploration of the Spanish, right? They were all over Mexico and what is present day today Mexico, all over South America. And they expanded all the way to California, New Mexico, and Texas, Florida. So they haven't gone away. They're still there. And so there's already a very diverse group of, societies that are living in the West prior to American arrival. So you've got the Spanish in New Mexico, you've got Mormons in Utah, Tejanos, Mexican Tejanos in Texas, and of course you got Native Americans out there as well. So Native Americans, as a blanket term to cover basically all of the Native American tribes that are out there, historians have sort of settled on the term Plains Indians. And so to give you an idea of some of the tribes that are out there, and this is just a tiny list, but you got the Arapaho, Blackfoot, Cheyenne, Kiowa, Sioux. And these are some of the ones that I wanted to mention now because, they're some of the ones that we're going to be talking about in the weeks to come. But as you can imagine, as Americans kept pushing west, and Native Americans were being pushed off of their land, and what comes out of this is obviously violent altercations between the two. These Native American tribes suffered greatly because of American expansion. The government's way to deal with them, essentially, was to move them off of the land. The American attitude towards Native Americans was that, quote unquote, they weren't using the land properly. And what that meant was, these tribes, they heavily depended on the buffalo herd for pretty much everything, not just as sustenance, food, but they used every part of that animal, from the hide to the bones, everything to make everyday tools and things for themselves. Now, the other thing as well, and what they meant by saying that they were not using the land properly or right, was that Native American tribes like these, they didn't settle in one place. They were mostly following the herds around. And what this means, when you put that next to American expansion, is that they were, quote unquote, getting in the way of progress, sometimes resulting in violent altercations. So in 1851, what the government decided to do was to go ahead and move forward with the Treaty of Fort Laramie. And what that did was essentially it moved the Native Americans off of the land, put them in reservations. This is the beginning of the reservation policy. And we're not talking about assimilation yet, but they very heavily encouraged that Native Americans pick up white ways. And what they meant by that was farming, living in permanent settlements, that sort of thing. And so the problem with this is, they're essentially making a completely independent group of people, totally dependent on government assistance. And what I mean by that is, they are going to be helping these Native Americans by providing food for them, blankets, any kind of necessities and things that they might need to help them transition. And they're also disrupting their culture, their way of life. Now, one of the biggest problems with the Treaty of Fort Laramie was that the government is basically going to be paying cash money for disrupting the buffalo grounds. So if we look at it this way, right, let's analyze this for a minute. What's happening here with Native American tribes, quote unquote, getting in the way or clashing with Americans moving out west, either as they're heading into California or they're settling out to, we'll talk about, the Homestead Act and things like that. But what's happening here is the Native Americans are following around the herd, right? The herd of buffalo or bison. And so if we want to stop the Native Americans from getting in the way, right, so to speak, then what do we do? Well, first let's find out, why are they getting in the way? Why are they so mobile? Well, that's because they're moving around following the herd, right, of these animals that they live off of. Well, then it's simple. Then how do we stop them from moving around? Well, we destroy the buffalo. And so when the government decided to take on this idea of paying cash for killing the buffalo, it was essentially to stop Native Americans from moving around so much, to minimize the attacks on settlers, to minimize the altercations that are happening between the two groups. So the reservation system is starting to take place. It really didn't take very long to move the Native Americans off the land because the buffalo are essentially going to be gone. And so this is only the beginning of a very, very difficult road ahead for Native Americans. But we'll pick up more on that a little bit later. I want to mention also that, it's not just these other societies, groups of people that are living out there, but you also have a lot of native-born Northerners. So lots of small farmers and lots of nativism, which is another topic that we're going to discuss later on. So during this time, there's a lot of immigration taking place. There are groups of Americans that do not like all of these immigrants coming into the nation, coming into the country. We'll see the rise of another party, as in Know Nothings, coming up pretty soon in the next chapter. But like I said, it's just complicating things, if anything. Another thing I wanted to mention as well is, we got white Southerners too. Okay, white Southerners and their plantations. Obviously, slavery is going to continue to be an issue, and there's a lot of disagreement about slavery and the spread of slavery. And as the United States grows in size, and more states apply for statehood, right, as these territories get populated and they reach that threshold where they're ready to apply for statehood, the question is going to come up on whether or not they should be a slave state or a free state. So more on that to come. But for now, we are going to sort of shift gears a little bit. And on the next video, we are going to be talking about Texas and Oregon. So stay tuned for that one. Head on down to the next video, and I will see you real soon. Bye-bye.